Okie dokie, everybody. We are going live on Facebook and Instagram, ready for another day of live streaming. Super fun. Everybody jumping on again for another Astro-Babble update. So let's go ahead. We've got 8 more charts that we're looking at this morning. And of these 8 charts, all of you sent in your birth date, place, and exact birth time. If you would like to be on these live videos, please private message me your birth dates in terms of your, again, birth date, place, and exact birth time. I need that exact birth time. Spell out your month and day for me, and we will put you in the queue. We've got a couple more days worth of queue left, but plenty of space for everybody. Hey, Jen, thanks for joining. Love you. And we will get to it. But before we do, I just wanted to take a moment and say thank you to everybody who's been private messaging me. For those of you who have already been in the queue, the messages that you've sent about the feedback for your chart consults has been very moving, very touching, very inspiring for me as somebody who studies astrology, to see how life affirming it is, to see how beautiful it can really be, and how it can change your life with just a couple minutes if you understand what you're looking at. So I would be more than happy to help anybody with a private consult. If you'd like to go deeper into your chart, just hit me up, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com. Or if you'd like to learn astrology, you can always go to scorpiorisingastrology.com and check out some of the classes I have, or view previous videos on the YouTube channel, which I will post in the comment section of the Facebook Live video post session. Okie dokie. So let's go ahead and start. We've got our first chart. Open up a fizzy water, and we're going to start with Maureen. Maureen was born 6:35 a.m. in Wilkes. That's interesting. That's also the name of Sally Kay's dog. For Sally Kay, who's watching on, we need to be a little bit concerned with Maureen's chart, just because the moon is at 0 degrees of Capricorn. Whenever a planet is at 0 degrees, or the ascendant is very close to that 0 degree mark, we need to be very specific about birth time, because just a couple minutes in either direction, and we could potentially shift those placements. So making sure that the exact birth time is correct. But a moon in Capricorn, as well as the ascendant and the north node in Capricorn in the first house, bring a lot of stubbornness to the personality, bring a lot of being headstrong, knowing your stuff, mature, early maturity, access over time. I think that's a beautiful trait to have, but it is a little bit tricky when you're a teenager with that Capricorn ascendant and that moon in Capricorn, trying to buck the system because you literally know better than they do. Just because Capricorn has an eye and an ear and a nose, and all of their senses are basically trying to make things more efficient. And when something isn't efficient, Capricorn just can't stand that restriction. There's so much anxiety there, because we forget, Capricorn is an earth sign, but it's also a cardinal sign. Yeah, so it's that earth energy, that density, that sovereignty, that ability to move mountains. But that cardinal aspect does bring that spark, that flare, that sense of restlessness if Capricorn isn't focused on achieving something it finds of value. And achieving something it finds of value is a very subjective process for Capricorn. Not everybody finds the same things of value, and that's where the disconnect sort of happens. Let's see. And then we have the second house in Aquarius, where the sun is, with a Venus cazimi. Fabulous. First thing in the morning. So a cazimi, I've thrown this term around a couple times with these charts. A cazimi is when a planet is in the heart of the sun. So within 1 degree can join the sun. It's basically backlit by the sun. So it's when the sun's power is pouring through that planet and really doubling down on a lot of its qualities. Because we've got Venus in cazimi with the sun, and Mercury here as well in Aquarius, an air sign, which it loves, out of combustion with the sun, which is great. In the second house, finance, money is a big topic for Maureen and everything that she's here to learn in this lifetime, especially because her first house and her second house are both ruled by Saturn. So let's look at that Saturn, shall we? Saturn is up in Scorpio in the 11th, along with the MC and Mars in Scorpio. So we've got both both prolifics in the 11th house of friendships and social groups, as well as the MC, which is the highest point of the chart. And where we see the MC in somebody's chart, it's kind of like the top of their personal mountain. It's where they're striving towards what their definition of success is. And Maureen's personal definition of success is to find her tribe, find her people. The issue with that is that we have Mars and Saturn here in the 11th. So when it comes to Maureen's kind of personal sense of satisfaction regarding finding the people that she resonates with some pretty prickly characters. People who have that Saturnian stubbornness, people who have that Mars-like passion, traits that are not always easy to handle, which Maureen actually thrives in. Anybody with that interesting sense of spark, Maureen tends to gravitate towards, but those same people that are sparky to her tend to piss a lot of people off just because they are so dry. Both Saturn and Mars have a dry quality. Saturn is cold, whereas Mars is hot, but both of those planetary energies are astringent. They pull the compassion out of a subject and they break it down into its constituent parts. And that's something that Maureen really, really values about the people that she socially interacts with. And something that she strives for herself is to break things down into the most easy to digest bits and pieces with no fluff, no filter. That's another great keyword, no filter, for just Maureen in general and Maureen's social group in general. And really understanding that, hey, there is an underbelly to the world, and there are tips and tricks and hacks and things that make living life a little bit easier. But if you dance around the subject, if you try to coat it in all these layers of BS, it's not going to get exposed. So Maureen is definitely on that camp and surrounds herself with people who are willing to expose the underbelly of life. And part of that is also touched by we've got Pluto and Leo. We've got Pluto and Leo retrograde in the 8th house of death, taxes and accounting, just a couple degrees away from that Mercury and Aquarius in the 2nd. That's going to be slightly toxic of a placement, especially because it's ruled by the sun in the 2nd. So I think part of the reason why finances are so important to Maureen and why it's so important to establish self-worth, self-value, even to the extent of surrounding yourself with material possessions in somewhat of a hoarding capacity or over-identifying with your possessions, is because of this toxic sense of loss that's always been present in the chart. Pluto and Leo does not like to be held back. Your entire generation has that Pluto and Leo. You've come into the world with it retrograde and put it in your 8th house of death, taxes and estates. So you've inherited this cultural theme of, let's buck the system and anything could collapse at any given time, and the drama of toxicity. But you've put it in a very specific place in your life, which opposes your financial house and the idea that anybody, anything, and any place could be taken away from you at any given time. That hauntedness is a part of your makeup and a part of your chart, which is why you cling to things so dearly. And I think if you understand that a little bit, it's not necessarily about accruing wealth. It's about trying to find comfort in the things that you can control versus the things that you can't control, like death, like the stock market, like other people's business decisions, Because we've got Mercury and Aquarius ruling the 6th house of work, Jupiter specifically is there. In Gemini retrograde, though, we do find good prosperity and good money connections with whatever Maureen chooses to do for a living. And her actually being very successful, especially in a solar or Jupiterian way, where she is big, she is bold, she is brash, and letting her personality do the talking, because we've got that 10th house of career ruled by that Venus Cazimi in the 2nd house of finance. So if she actually wanted to help people get on their feet financially, if she wanted to become a motivational speaker, especially in the financial space, I think that would be an interesting way to use some of her placements, especially her no-nonsense Capricorn energy. Okay, that is that is all we have to say about Maureen's chart. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. Yes, if you would like to submit your birth information, just message me privately your birth date, place, time, exact birth times, spell out the month and the day for me for those of you who are overseas so I don't get the month and the day confused. And we will add you to the queue, which is a couple days long at this point. Okie dokie. Let's go to chart number 2. And we have A.E. Elizabeth. And this person was born at 11 p.m. in Cavan. Let's go ahead and look at this chart. Okay, so we've got a Scorpio ascendant. Props to all my Scorpio ascendants out there. But we have Uranus and Scorpio in the first house, which is another one of those generational planets because Uranus has about a 7-year cycle. Everybody in that 7-year period who was born has that Uranus and Scorpio. You were born during Uranus retrograde, and you've put that Uranus retrograde within 5 degrees of your ascendant, which is a little bit tricky, just a little bit tricky. Uranus in the first house automatically begs an unpredictable personality, but when we see that unpredictable personality manifest through the lens of Scorpio, which tends to be dark, tends to be submissive, tends to be submersive, very detective-oriented, intuitive, and secret. Secrets are the currency of Scorpio. When we see Uranus here, it's almost like that assassin spy who's also slightly insane. So we need to be aware that Scorpio tendency might get the best of you and might make you feel a little bit off your rocker at times, just because Uranus is so close to that ascendant. We have to be aware of that unpredictability being part of your nature, and for your personality to be a little bit more temperamental than most because Uranus is here. And that's anybody who puts Uranus on the ascendant. But Scorpio gives it a specific blend of potency because of that Scorpio deep water energy. And we've got more deep water energy in the chart for this lovely natal reading. We've got Venus in Pisces in the sign of its exaltation. Well, absolutely lovely. In the 5th house of creativity, sexuality, and children. We've also got the South Node here in Pisces. Unfortunately, we do have Mercury in Pisces stationed, which is in the sign of its detriment, which kind of cancels out the Venus. And then we've got Mars here in Pisces as well at 29 degrees, 53 clicks in. Oh my gosh, so close to being Mars in Aries. So close, which is the sign of its natural rulership. But she does have the Sun in Aries in the 6th to make up for it, to bring in some of that fire into the space. So we've got connections already in this chart between the 1st house of personality, 5th house of creativity, and 6th house of work. So anything that this person would do in the creative space would actually fuel her spirit and potentially would be a good day job opportunity for her. I think if she was the art director for even like a local community gallery or museum, anything working in that creative space, I think would just be really, really helpful for her. Let's look at, and she's got Jupiter in Cancer up in the 9th at 29 degrees on the cusp of Cancer, but still a Jupiter in Cancer, which is the sign of its exaltation, glorious. Jupiter in Cancer in the 9th, I know that placement very well because I have it at 17 degrees. With my moon and sun in Cancer. So I know that energy very well. And it's just that idea that throughout the life, being exposed to foreign culture is going to be a really big thing for you. And especially because that Jupiter is ruling everything in the 5th house of children, creativity, sexuality, it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of your creative endeavors are about exploring other cultures, bringing in other forms of artwork that are foreign to your native land, and working with those mediums, those styles, those colors, those prints, those textiles. Working in foreign art is definitely something that we see very, very heavily themed in the chart. And because we have the Sun in Aries ruling the Moon in Leo, which is in the 10th house of success and career, you have the potential to be excellent at what you do. Absolutely excellent at what you do. The moon is also making a 3-degree trine. It's at 13. The sun is at 16. So there's an applying fire trine between the sun and the moon, which is absolutely fabulous. The issue is that because the sun is making a trine to the moon, that moon at 13 degrees is also making a square to the Scorpio ascendant, which means that all of this success, all of this doing good at work, especially in the creative realm and using those creative talents, those parenting talents, in order to pole vault or pivot herself into a successful situation, the personality is not necessarily on board with that at any given time, because Scorpio prefers to be reclusive, especially with that Uranus, impulsively reclusive. So there will be moments of like, nope, we're pulling the plug, we're cutting the cord, I can't do this anymore, I need a month of just nothing. And that extreme burnout, as well as those extreme productive highs, part of this natal chart's personality. Yeah, so there are a lot of very interesting dynamics here. I think one of the things that we can really learn from this chart is all of that Pisces energy in the fifth house of creativity is being opposed by a Saturn in Virgo in the 11th, as well as the MC in Virgo and the North Node in Virgo up in the 11th. Whenever I see this kind of stacking up against major planetary placements, there's an idea of polar opposites counterbalancing the extremes. And in this chart, the major counterbalance is the house of friendships, which is also where her North Node is, the point where her soul is trying to grow into. Saturn is here, those lessons that we really learn when we're 30, 58, 60. For those first and second Saturn returns, if she surrounds herself with friends that are actually able to manage her time, if she surrounds herself with a very productive assistant, if she surrounds herself with that Virgo energy, which is all about task mastering and really getting stuff done on a schedule, on a budget, on a timeline, then she'll be able to wrangle in all of that creativity, have somebody to check her balances, and really make sure that she's able to control that artistic fire and that water energy as well behind it, that's kind of lamping that the gas, the oil that's lamping that creative fire. I think that the Virgo energy and that Saturn energy in the 11th house of friendships, surrounding herself with people who are hyper productive and very focused on managing, is going to be the way that we control some of those uncontrollable resources in her chart. Thank you, everybody. Happy Easter weekend. Hey, Barbara, thank you so much. I appreciate you. Ludmilla, we've got you coming up in the queue. Thank you, Maureen. I'm so glad that you're enjoying it. Thank you, Tundi, for jumping on. Thank you, everybody on Instagram who's also jumping on at Scorpio Rising Astrology. This is, I think, the 6th or 7th time that we're doing this live stream. If you would like to be a part of the live stream, submit your birth information via private message to me. I need your birth date, place, and time. We'll add you to the queue. Or if you'd prefer it not to be public and you'd like to schedule a consult, just hit me up, Sam at ScorpioRisingAstrology.com, and we will schedule an appointment. Okay, let's look at Mariah. Mariah was born at 2:50 a.m. in Wausau. I think that's how you say it. Wausau. It's like USA, but Wa. Let's look at the Cancer ascendant, ruled by the moon in Leo in the 2nd house of finance. That's fun. So again, we've got that identification with finance and wealth. Mercury is also here in Leo in the 2nd, and then the sun is over in Virgo in the 3rd, as well as Jupiter and Venus in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, and communication. That's a fun lineup. Whenever I see the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd houses connected, there's an idea that personality in the 1st house, finance, wealth in the 2nd house, and the 3rd house of writing, teaching, and communication are connected. So how Mariah earns her money might be in the creative writing space. It might be teaching or creating classes for people to learn various skills. What those skills are, we'll kind of get into in a minute, but especially with Jupiter and Virgo ruling her 6th house of work in Sagittarius, the idea that she is a teacher, she is a writer, she is a communicator, or that's what she does for a living, is something that is very, very prominent in her chart. That Jupiter in Virgo in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, also ruling her 9th house of travel, higher education, and foreigners. So she might actually be a college professor as well, or teach at a higher level than most. getting into that scholastic system. She might also talk, write, or teach about foreign culture, and weaving in those ninth house topics to the writing, which she makes money from in her second house, which is tied to her personality in the first. So that's how we look at the houses in astrology, as we see where the planets are, but also where the signs are that those planets rule. And we kind of weave together the story of somebody's life by considering the planets, the signs, the aspects, the houses, all together in a complete picture. Let's see, we do have Saturn and Aquarius retrograde in the 8th house of death, taxes, estates, making an opposition to, stronger opposition to Mercury and Leo. Yeah, that's a little bit of a tricky placement. The idea that financially there might be some debt issues. There might be some constant struggle with money to be with money being available, with money being taken away for one reason, with there being a financial ceiling that doesn't seem to be removed, because Saturn is that planet that really, especially when it's retrograde, it sticks its ground and it does not move in the natal chart. It's a very fierce planet to contend with, especially with it being in its own domicile in Aquarius. Saturn is also ruling that 7th house of relationships. So one of the financial issues might actually be related to partners or taking on secondhand debt from partnerships. Or the death of a partner, leaving the finances strained, which makes it difficult to pursue one's passions, that kind of thing. I think that pretty much summarizes the chart. In terms of the core elements, we've got other stuff like 5th house, creativity, sexuality, children being ruled by Mars and Gemini in the 12th. That's a pretty fascinating placement. Should children come into the picture, I'd be a little bit worried, because Mars is ruling the house about injury to the children, especially with the Mars being in the 12th house of hospitalizations, that children are always winding up in the hospital with some sort of injury, especially because Mars is in Gemini, in the arms, the hands, or the lungs. So that's a thing. But we do have Pluto and Scorpio here in the 5th house. So should children come into the picture, I think it's one of the most rewarding things that Mariah could do, is to rear the next generation in a way that makes her feel connected to her life's purpose, and kind of erasing some of her personal karma by raising children right in a way that maybe she was not able to be raised herself, especially because her 4th house of family is ruled by that Venus in Virgo, the sign of its detriment, opposing its exaltation in Pisces. I think that one of the issues that we might actually see is a feeling of never being loved enough. And if she's able to carry that through into the next generation of children and really allow herself to become that vessel for love for somebody else, and make sure that they get what she did not, that's very healing to her natal chart in general. But in terms of life purpose and life direction, besides that little thing, we've got the North Node in the 6th house of work, health, pets, being ruled by Jupiter and Virgo, ruling the 9th house of travel. Wouldn't surprise me if she also, besides the writing stuff, which she's so good at, it wouldn't surprise me if she also worked in a mobile vet's office, or if she studied animal medicine, or is very connected to animals. But that idea that the 1st house of self, the 2nd house of finance, the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication are connected really dominate the theme of Mariah's chart. Excellent. So that is Mariah's chart. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beth. Thank you, Fatima. Thank you, everybody who's jumping on Facebook and Instagram. I appreciate you. Let's go ahead and continue to move down the line. We're about 23 minutes into the live stream, and we've got, this is chart number 4. Okay, so we've got Ludmilla. Ludmilla was born 10:48 a.m. in Makeup. Let's look at this chart. So we've got the ascendant in Gemini at 28 degrees, being ruled by Mercury and Pisces in the 10th. This has been a really rough time for you, Ludmilla, in terms of career stuff with the Mercury retrograde. through Pisces. Thankfully, this morning, for those of you who follow my forecast on social media via Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Mercury did move into Aries, into Ludmila's 11th house of friendship. So that's a nice little twist. But just the idea that the past couple months, ever since the beginning of February, has been particularly hard for Ludmila in terms of the career space and the identity space, because Mercury was transiting through that house for her. That's how we would watch transits. One of the things that she might actually find herself in is using her personality to gain traction in her career, especially because she's got the ascendant ruled by Mercury and Pisces in the 10th house of success. The sun is also here in the 10th house of success, as well as Jupiter in Scorpio in the 6th house of work. So what she does for a living would highly involve her personality, might be a speaker, or somebody who uses, again, that medium of communication and personality to influence others, and become an influencer in the space that she chooses, especially in work, health, pets, that 6th house theme that Jupiter rules. We've got that 3rd house in Leo, with the moon there, which again puts a connection between the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, and the 10th house of career. And that's how we again look at, we're getting all these writers and the writers, speakers, communicators in the queue this morning. And Ludmila definitely has that blood in her chart in terms of giving her the voice, the mind, the ability to reach other people through her personality, through her way with words, through just who she is as a person, and communicating those ideals in a way that everybody really understands. I think we do have a little bit of an issue in the chart here because that Jupiter in Scorpio is retrograde in the 6th house of work, health, pets, and it is opposing Saturn and Mars in Taurus in the 12th. I do not like to see that because both malefics are just 2 degrees away from each other. That's a powerful 12th house kind of negative spot. Because Taurus medically is the sign of the neck, the ligaments, and the metabolism, it wouldn't surprise me if metabolism disorders, if chronic neck issues, especially issues involving shooting pain or vertebra misalignments, are part of the equation, like a whiplash injury. Taurus and Scorpio are also both digestive signs, so the idea that they're in opposition, not great for the health and wellness houses. We need to be very specific about the diet with Ludmila. Food sensitivities, especially food sensitivities that, if not listened to, would result in massive bloating and systemic inflammation, part of that equation. Water will need to be a big part of the equation as well, because we have so much in the lymphatic system of Pisces happening up in the 10th. So a little bit of medical astrology going there as well. We also see Pluto in the, man, all of the gut stuff, all of the gut and immune stuff is lighting up medically for Ludmila. So we need to be specifically aware of leaky gut stuff, lining the gut with probiotics, making sure that food is broken down and digestible, avoiding a raw food diet, making sure that everything is cooked, healthy fats are paid attention to, and that things aren't just flowing through the gut without being absorbed. So that's a really interesting kind of side effect of looking at these charts cold, is jumping from medical to metaphysical, and likewise back and forth. We do have Jupiter ruling the 7th house of relationships. That means at work, she might actually find a spouse. She might find somebody who, all of her dating prospects are normally because of the work stuff or connected to her job in some way, shape, or form, because her work is really who she is and what she does. She's got so many identifying placements with her career that it's hard to separate what she does from who she is, and because of that, her relationships follow suit. I think that's a good breakdown of Ludmila's chart. There's a lot to go into here, but there is a lot of good stuff that we were able to pull out of the chart right away. Cool. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Tammy, if you would like to jump into the queue, just private message me your birth date, place, and exact birth time, spell out your month and day if you are overseas to make sure that I don't get those too confused, and we will put you in the queue, which is a couple days long. I do about 8 of these a day, and I'm still going strong for a week now, so let's keep it going if you're interested, and shoot me those birthday deets, and we will get to it. Yeah. All right. Deborah, moving on to Deborah. Let's go to Deborah's chart at 12:29 p.m. in Hobbs. The ascendant is in Pisces, which means Jupiter is the lord of the chart. Jupiter is also at 29 degrees of Virgo in the 7th house of relationships. So we've got that idea of, ooh, we've got a double opposition here. No, just kidding. We've got a single opposition. The idea of the ascendant at 24 degrees opposing Jupiter in the 7th house of relationships. The lord of the chart is in the 7th house of relationships. We've got an over-identification with the spouse, with the partner. That feeling that you need somebody else in your life to complete you, Deborah, is something that's naturally ingrained in the chart. It's not necessarily a healthy influence, but it is something that your astrology just naturally says that you're prone to. We need to be aware that that is potentially toxic, especially with Pluto at 0 degrees of Virgo, right on the edge of that 7th house of relationships. The people who you're attracted to are not necessarily good for you. And you'll start to understand why that is as you mature throughout age 50 is really when that started to click in, a potential second marriage, doing it the second time around, as Pluto starts to understand, hey, there's a difference between somebody being anal in terms of like, we need to do things this way and we need to get things done, and there's a list, there's a process, there's all of those Virgo tendencies that you admire so heavily, and somebody just being rude and cynical and no fun, and a party pooper. Virgo knows how to have a good time, but that good time has rules, which directly oppose your Pisces ascendant, which really just wants to go with the flow. So in some ways, the partnership is helpful, but we just need to understand that too much of that restrictive earth energy that Virgo brings in might be a little bit too distasteful in the beginning of your life. Especially because we do have that Mercury in Capricorn in the 11th. You tend to surround yourself for some reason with people who counterbalance your Pisces nature, even though you have that Sun in Sag in the 10th, which we'll get to in a second. Just the idea that all of your mutable traits of needing to be spontaneous, needing to go with the flow, needing to create space for the unpredicted. Hey, everybody jumping on. That's part of your makeup, but the people you surround yourself with, relationship-wise, friendship-wise, directly contradict that. And I think that that's actually a healthy formation for you to have, because it does allow you to slow down and not take things so seriously. We do have that Sun in Sagittarius and Saturn in Sagittarius, as well as the MC up in the 10th, being ruled by that Jupiter in Virgo in the 7th. So when we look at the 7th house and the 10th house being connected, you might actually start a business or work with your spouse, because the 10th house is occupied by the Sun and Saturn. It's very, very probable that you are very good at what you do, to the extent that you are a star in your field. That's something that we see a lot in 10th house dynamics. You step into the situation and everybody respects you regardless of your experience level, interesting enough. And they just kind of bow down to you because you have that charisma and talent and uniqueness, for those of you who know what show I'm referencing, that really shines above the rest. But Saturn in Sagittarius really does make sure that you know your stuff. Your career might actually revolve around relationships as well, because of that 7th house connection. Let's see, what else do we see in the chart? Moon in Aquarius and the 12th being ruled by Saturn in the 10th. That's tricky. That's tricky, tricky, tricky. When we look at your 10th house of success being connected to your 12th house of hidden enemies and hospitalizations, there is a high chance of burnout. There is a high chance that you'll be emotionally compromised by the position that your career puts you in. It's going to be a little bit rough on you personally, to feel emotionally distanced from what you do, and to really, this is the best way to describe it. It's kind of like a Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head situation where your career demands your personality. Yeah. But your personality is separate from your heart, which is separate from your mind, which is separate from your spirit, which is separate from your physical body. So although you might need to get dolled up makeup wise, and you might need to give your personality over to your profession and your body over to your profession, you can keep your mind and your heart separate in other pockets that are like hidden or not as accessible. And I think that that's an important tool for you to learn. It might make you feel apathetic. It might make you feel detached. It might make you feel like your heart's not in the work. But if your heart was in the work, it would break and be destroyed and crushed. Yeah. So I think a certain amount of apathy or distance is actually good for you in that perspective. We do have Mars and Aries in the second house, so money comes in quick, it leaves quick. We've got some impulsive warpath energy in the financial house. That's really interesting. Wouldn't surprise me if you collect things like swords, maces, guns, battle armaments of various sorts, because that's what Mars and Aries does. Mars and Aries is also ruling that ninth house of travel, higher education, and foreigners. Earning money by traveling for a living, earning money via interacting with different cultures, definitely something that's on the table for you personally, although we do have Venus in Scorpio here, which is in its fall, and we do have Neptune here in Scorpio, which is also not great. The North Node is here, though, which does mean that it's an important part of your life purpose to understand this house. But it's all connected to money. Interesting. Let me give you an extreme example, and I love to do this. So when I work with client charts one-on-one, I always like to give, like, based on the house placements, the signs, and what I'm seeing in the chart, the most crazy example of how this would potentially play out. Putting all of the factors together, this is what I think would be a really interesting expression of your chart, although it's crazy and really niched and super nuanced. But this is an example of how the pieces would fit together. So you've got this sun in Sag, right? The sun in Sagittarius up in the 10th makes you a great personality, gives you a lot of solar energy and radiance to your career. But we've also got this Mars Venus in the 2nd, the 9th. What you do for money is different than what you do for your career. And because Jupiter is over here in relationships, but it is also opposing the ascendant, we might find that you working to expose undercover drug cartels overseas, or doing press spots about overseas drug use or addiction issues or mistreatment of women would be part of the dynamic, because we have Venus in its exile, in its fall in Scorpio, in the 9th house of travel, foreigners, and higher learning. So you using that personality and that Mars energy in the 2nd house of wealth to then travel abroad, see what you can see in terms of how people are treated in their relationships, expose how negatively they're treated, and then also understands that you can benefit from that in a way by understanding that, hey, boundaries are a good thing. They're not necessarily something that's meant to keep you down, although in a large part of the world, boundaries are put in place to keep, especially women, that Venus and Scorpio energy down, underground, secret, to make them feel like they are part of that underworld that nobody likes to visit. So yeah, that's a little bit about that. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. Angelica, hi, nice to see you. Everybody on Instagram, wave in, hi. So we are going live with charts. If you would like to be a part, just submit your birth date, place, and exact time to me via Messenger, and make sure to spell out the month and date. If you would like to schedule a private chart consult or check out some of my online classes, just go to ScorpioRisingAstrology.com. Okay, we are on our next chart. I think this is number 6. Let's look at Stephen. Stephen was born at 12:33 a.m. in Alton. Already we've got big personality markers for Stephen because we've got Jupiter and Leo conjoined exactly at 7 degrees with the ascendant in the first house. Big old personality, big old Leo personality. Jupiter makes things big. Leo makes things flamboyant and large. It's kind of like taking a gas tank and lighting it on fire and it all going boom. That's what's happening in Stephen's first house. It is being ruled by the sun in Libra in the 3rd. The sun is in the sign of its fall here, so we do have some self-consciousness issues when it comes to writing, teaching, communication. But that's actually where a lot of the power is, because Pluto is also here in Libra in the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication. The sun is right on that cusp, It's at 29 degrees of Libra. It's so close to getting into Scorpio. And we've got a Scorpio stellium, but we've just on the edge. I think one of the things about Stephen's chart already that I'm seeing is there's a need to understand that all of that energy, all of that flamboyant Jupiterian explosion that's happening in the first house must be discharged through writing, teaching, communication. Writing, teaching, communication. Writing, teaching, communication. This is something that must be done. Otherwise, you would have allowed yourself to be born a couple hours later, and you would have put your sun in Scorpio where I think you think it belongs. It does not. You're here to take all of that fiery Leo-ness and to use it for the transmission of information from one soul to another. And I think that's something that will really start to make sense the older you are, especially around 50, because Pluto is that level 50 planet that matures halfway through the life. So that's one big thing about the chart already, is we've got so much stacked up in the personality house, but it's directly related to how we take that energy and become the best teacher that we can, as opposed to letting it get sucked into some of the darker themes in the chart. And by darker, let's talk about darkness for 2 seconds, because Stephen's got a lot of it. When I say darkness, I don't necessarily mean evil. Yeah, I think that's something about astrology that we need to understand, is that astrology is neither good nor bad. There are ideal placements, there are not ideal placements, but you can work with all of them. And that's part of the reason why you hire an astrologer, is you have somebody who can say, here's the lowest expression of this planetary placement, here's the highest expression of this planetary placement. And it's really your choice whether you activate it through the life lessons that you learn over and over as these transits hit your natal placements. And when we talk about Stephen's darkness, I mean that he has this Scorpio stellium, Venus, Mars, Uranus, Mercury, in the 4th house of family, which is also the midnight point of the chart. It is literally the darkest part of the chart. It does rule family, which makes this house rather sticky without the Scorpio tendencies, but we've got all the Scorpio tendencies here, including a Venus-Mars conjunction in the 4th house in Scorpio, which is crazy town. So when it comes to right off the bat, when it comes to gender fluidity, when it comes to bisexuality, when it comes to sexual themes, because that's what Scorpio is, relating to Mars and Venus being conjunct, there's kind of like, there are blinders on in terms of gender norms. And we see that already in the 4th house. Wouldn't surprise me if in the family there was transgender stuff happening. There was sexual identity stuff happening. There was a lot of that scorpionic passion, but specifically with the blending of the male and female planets being conjoined, like there's just this theme in Stephen's chart of like, yeah, there's a lot happening here, but it's not necessarily the way you expect in terms of male-female expressions that are traditional. And we also have Uranus and Scorpio to kind of back that up. Mercury is in Scorpio here in the first house, being ruled by Mars. So parents probably actually very good at communication, potentially toxic mind though, or a mind that is hidden, sharp, or potentially venomous. Words that are used against you in the family dynamic. Um, uh, Potentially parents who are also detectives, parents who are also psychotherapists, parents who are also using the mind in a way that is sharp, slightly manipulative, and intuitive, detective oriented. Yeah, so there's a lot happening in that fourth house that I think we could continue to unpack, but we've got to move on to that Sun in Cancer in the 12th, making a trine to the to the Venus and Mars conjunction in the fourth. That's some powerful water energy in the chart. Very powerful water energy in the chart. The moon in Cancer is in the 12th house of hospitalizations, as well as the 12th house of hidden enemies. So when we see any of the major planets, the sun, moon, the ascendant, connected to the 12th house, we already have self-esteem issues right off the bat. We have the idea, especially with Cancer, wanting to be withdrawn and in its shell and protective, that emotional heart that's surrounded by too many walls at times, but potentially also being hospitalized for stomach issues because of the 12th house and Cancer ruling the stomach. We also have so much happening in Scorpio, the sign of the gut, the sign of the reproductive system. All themes kind of point back to the reproductive system in general in Stephen's chart, which I think is a really interesting twist, especially because the ascendant is ruling something that's so powerfully charismatic. I think part of Stephen's role in this natal chart is taking those hidden parts of his feelings, his life experience, especially with family, and talking about them, teaching about them, letting those come forward in a way that makes them shareable, because he's in a unique place in order to do that, especially with that Mars and Scorpio conjunct Venus ruling his ninth house of higher education, travel, and foreigners. He's in a great place to take cultures, especially sexual cultures, to the next level through his experimental work and teaching work in that space. His firsthand experiences really allow him a platform that few other people actually have. And if he harnesses that correctly, he actually has the potential to make great money from it, especially after 30, with that Saturn in Virgo in the second house being ruled by Mercury in Scorpio in the fourth. Woo! That was a lot. Okay, let's go ahead. Happy Easter, y'all. We're talking about sex and astrology. Alrighty, let's get to it. We've got two more charts, I think. Myrline, who was born at 3:40 a.m. in Norway. Let's take a gander, shall we? Scorpio rising. Absolutely love it. We do have Neptune and Scorpio, though, on the ascendant. We need to be very careful with that placement. Neptune and Scorpio is prone to addiction issues and chemical sensitivities. So we need to understand that right off the bat, Marlene, from a medical astrology perspective, that things like caffeine, things like medications, things like alcohol, things like sugar are going to affect you much, much stronger than most people. Even something as simple as like chemicals like perfumes. Yeah. But your system is hypersensitive because of that Neptune and Scorpio energy on the ascendant, especially from a digestive place, because Scorpio rules the lower gut, but also bladder, sinus, and reproductive. So you just need to be aware of that placement. Anything that's near the ascendant is going to affect the body, but especially when I see that outer planet transit of Neptune and Scorpio, we find that the chemical issues and the subtler, often unseen chemical side effects of taking something like a sleeping pill or taking something like a cup of coffee are going to affect you in a way that very few other people understand who don't have that natal placement. We've got in the third house the sun, the moon, and Mercury. So she's a new moon baby. And the third house of communication, writing, teaching is also lit up by those three placements. So heavy identification of that. Oh, that's fun. That's a fun connection. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so here's what's going down in Mirlene's chart. We've got the third house, which has Mercury in it, but the 11th house in Virgo, yeah, is ruled by that Mercury in the third. So it wouldn't surprise me if she actually gets into the writing field, the teaching field, but she actually the one of the best ways that she writes, she teaches, she shares her information, and she communicates is actually with partners, having co-authors, co-writers, co-teachers, somebody who she's sharing her information with or sharing the stage with or the voice with in that book, in that article. She's a great interviewer because of that, but she'll find that if she tries to do it solo, everything goes wishy-washy. So when she does her projects and how she identifies with that third house of writing, teaching, communication, she needs somebody else to pull her out of her naturally emotionally withdrawn self, which anybody who is born during a new moon, let me give you some tidbits. If you were born during a new moon, and this is definitely something we could talk about in a natal chart consult, it means that the moon's light is compromised. So the moon, which represents your emotions, is hidden, yeah, behind the sun. And so your emotions are not forthcoming. You tend to be emotionally reclusive. You tend to be emotionally isolating. You tend to not talk about your feelings as much. And because of that, it can be really difficult for you to form partnerships. But I think one of the way that Mirlene has and will succumb or overcome that, rather not succumb but overcome that emotional withdrawn state is by working with somebody else who's able to uniquely kind of dive in and pull her out of that state, and actually get her to talk about the stuff that she doesn't want to talk about, which she would never bring up unless somebody else did it for her. Yes, and then we also have the sun in Capricorn, which is ruling that 10th house of career, and Jupiter in Leo is up here at 0 degrees, a freshly ingressed Jupiter who's retrograde. Oh, boo. It's a little bit of a detriment. But Jupiter in Leo in the 10th is a great placement regardless, especially because it is connected to the sun in the third. Being famous as a teacher, a writer, a speaker is definitely in the cards. But again, I would highly suggest that you don't do it solo. Even though the sun and that Leo placement does make you think that you could do it alone, you're so much better of a teacher, writer, speaker when you have somebody else fielding, interviewing you, pulling you out of the places that you naturally revert into, and getting you to open up and explore topics of self and topics of thought and emotional topics that you normally don't get to. Because that Jupiter in Leo retrograde is ruling the second house of finance, there's great opportunity for financial gain as a speaker, writer, teacher. Oh, but that's interesting. When we look at, again, astrology, we've talked about this before. Astrology differs from what we make money with versus what our career or vocation is and what we do as a day job. We've got Mars in Libra making the being the ruler of the 6th house of work, health, pets. So what she might actually do as a day job is be in a hospital or medical setting, potentially a vet's office. It's not necessarily ideal for her, especially but it is a family business because we've got Mars in Libra being ruled by Venus in Aquarius in the 4th of family. So the idea that, there are people in her family that are naturally in the medical field. It's easy for her to be in the medical field. She knows it. It's something that she gravitates towards, especially with her ability to kind of charge forward and make things her own, as well as her understanding of how medications work because of her issues with those. There is an issue though with that work environment not necessarily being ideal for her because Mars is in its fall of Libra. So we really need to focus on the writing, teaching, communication as far as how money is made. But from a day-to-day job, there might be some really big medical influences as well. Yes, and then relationships. This is such an interesting dynamic, and when I see the 7th house and the 4th house connected, spouses or potential relationship partners will be introduced to you via the family. They will often have children of their own as well. When we look at the seventh house being ruled by the fourth house, or the ruler of the seventh in the fourth, you really want to trust the people that your family sends your way as potential prospects. And if you don't have a partner already, and you are hankering for one, the best people will be filtered through your family first, and they will potentially have kids. Yeah, that's a really interesting dynamic, because that Venus in Aquarius is ruled by Saturn in Pisces in the fifth house of children. Alrighty, that's a great chart interpretation. Thanks, Mirleen. I appreciate you. Hey, Raven. Hey, Angelica. Hey, Rosie. Lots of stuff. Thank you so much. I've got Stephen just checking in. Thank you. Yep, we did your chart a couple minutes ago. The recording will be saved on Facebook, and I'll throw it up on YouTube later. We've just got a couple more minutes left, so we're gonna breeze through this last chart. Who is Gary? Hey, Gary. Gary was born at 4:45 a.m. in Hudson. Let's get to it. We've got an ascendant in Virgo. Ooh, a double Virgo. Double Virgo, because we've got the ascendant in Virgo and the moon in Virgo, as well as Jupiter in Virgo and Mercury in Virgo. That's some pretty heavy Virgo energy, Gary. Not gonna lie, that's pretty crazy. And you've got the moon in Taurus, so triple earth sign. Crazy town. That's awesome. And that moon is at 24 degrees, making an exact trine to the sun. Whoa, Gary. Whoa. You hit me with the earth first thing in the morning. And especially because you've got Mercury, the ruler of Virgo, in the first with you. You've just got such a solid, grounded understanding of who you are as a person. And I think that can actually be a little bit intimidating to people who don't understand why you're so convicted about who you are, what you do, and why you do things the way that you do. There's just a lot of certainty in your chart based on these placements, because you've got the ruler of your ascendant in your first house, and the moon making a trine to your sun. Like, there's so much, like, you came into this world knowing things that people just often don't get a chance to figure out in their lifetime. And that's such a gift, I think, really. You've got that moon in Taurus being ruled by Venus in Libra. Venus in Libra, Gary. Are you kidding me? Venus in Libra in the second? Lucky bastard. Ruling the moon in Taurus in the ninth, which is in the sign of its exaltation, can join the MC in the ninth. Gary, you're killing me. Oh my God. Such great placements, Gary. You win the day. Yeah, that moon in Taurus being ruled by the second, it wouldn't surprise me if you went to school for accounting, because ninth is that higher education, being ruled by the second of finance. Crap, Gary, that's really good juju. It wouldn't surprise me if you also fiddle in the stock market, especially if those stocks are foreign. The MC in the ninth, one of the big things that you aspire to do is travel the world. I think that you visiting other cultures, and especially with from a business and a financial perspective, would do you amazingly. But Venus and Libra in the second, I mean, you're not hurting for cash flow. It's really just all in the cards for you, hun. You've got some super solid placements right off the bat. The one thing that we will need to just be aware of is you tend to gravitate towards friends who are a little bit misfitty, because they complement your natural stability. Just because you're solid does not mean that you are obligated to gravitate towards people who are unsolid. Sometimes it is nice to be surrounded by people who play at your level, as opposed to you constantly being the fixer in other people's lives, because we've got that moon in Taurus ruling Mars in Cancer in the 11th, which is in the sign of its fall. You don't necessarily need to be the savior, Gary. Just in case you haven't heard that enough in your life, you deserve to be happy just like everybody else. And even though you've got your shit together, it's not necessarily a perfect recipe for happiness, especially if you surround yourself with people who are constantly out of that alignment. We've got Interesting. We've got that Pluto in Scorpio in the third house of writing, teaching, communication being ruled by the 11th, which is in the chart that we just saw, except it's reverse. The ruler of the third is in the 11th. Oh no, that was the mix. I think I'm forgetting already. Once the chart leaves, it's out of my mind. So when we look at the third house and the 11th house being connected via sign, there's an idea that you will eventually write, teach, and speak specifically about your interactions with the friends that you've chosen and their struggles and their fall from grace, but also being the narrative or helping them out of that situation. That will be an interesting topic, I think, for all of us to read about. We do have Saturn in Aquarius retrograde in the 6th. Work is work. Work really is just work. You're good at it. It's streamlined. It's focused. It's just something that you got to do. It's not easy, but it's not difficult. It's just part of that nature. You wish that things could be a lot more creative in your work dynamic. I think that's something that you secretly crave, is to do work that fuels your creative side, which is a little bit all over the place. You've got Neptune and Uranus in the house of creativity. One of the ways that you might actually find great success, Instagram's ending, sorry guys, pick up on Facebook. So one of the things that you might actually be interested in with creativity is witness children. Look at children for your creativity, Gary, because I think that what you'll find is if you're trapped and if you feel like you're doing the same thing day in, day out, which all of your Earth placements are totally prone to do, if you feel trapped by that kind of humdrum of the day and doing like that Groundhog's Day approach of just grinding. Yeah. One of the things that you might find really, really beneficial is to like go to a park or hang out with friends who have kids and just observe the children in their natural environment and how carefree they are. Watch them finger paint, watch them do random stuff and not care about the outcome, watch them spontaneously kind of run and jump and hurt themselves and get back up, because in the long scheme, just because you bruised your knee doesn't mean that you need to sacrifice your play. Like so many lessons that I think you could creatively enjoy through the eyes of a child, as opposed to, because you have so much practicality in your chart, you tend to get weighed down. Your ego does, your mind does, your emotion gets weighed down by all of this practicality. And I think one of the ways that we unlock that practicality is by looking at people, especially because children are the best example, but people who are in that creative space that really, they don't care as much as you do. They're not attached to the outcome as much as you are. And you can really learn so many life lessons by just witnessing their unabashed appreciation of that whimsical play that creativity tends to bring forward in people who are truly touched by the muses, which is something that Earth signs have a little bit of trouble with. So yeah, that's that. That is Gary's chart, and I think that is it for today. We are all set. Yes, traveling the world. Let me travel the world. Love it. So let's go ahead and wrap up our live stream for today. Thank you everybody for joining on. Again, if you would like to submit your personal birth date, place, time for the queue, feel free. We've got lots of cool stuff coming up. We've got a couple days worth, so if you're able to wait a little bit, just give me your birth date, place, exact birth time, spell out your month and day. Or if you would like to schedule a private consult, feel free to shoot me an email, sam@scorpiorisingastrology.com. Go to scorpiorisingastrology.com for any classes that you'd like to take. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Another successful day, another successful live stream. We'll do it again tomorrow at 10:30, and I will message you if your chart is in queue, if you submitted it. And as always, may the stars be ever in your favor.